Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be today. My name is Ron Howell. I am the Vice President of Information Technology at Columbia International University. And so today, I'm going to be sharing insights on measuring and maturing your cybersecurity risk posture. Just to share a little more about me, I've actually been in IT leadership, executive management for over 15 years and served in the higher education space, the K-12 space, as well as state government. But my educational background is more so on the business side of things. I do have an information systems degree. And my passions over the past few years have been specifically in the area of IT governance. So today's talk is going to be coming from the perspective of a governance lens, a little bit, less of the technical bells and whistles. So with that said, we'll move right along. So the objectives, want to share information to help us learn more, know about leveraging frameworks to enhance our cyber risk posture, how to use key risk indicators to measure cybersecurity program maturity, and how to implement continuous improvement strategies for risk maturity. Before I go any further and really talk about the main topic for today, measuring and maturing your cyber risk posture, I want to just set the stage. So I have a slide up that you all are looking at, and some of this information is probably not new to anyone joining today. We know that cyber threats are constantly increasing. They're actually advancing. They're getting smarter. They're getting better. And we know that our institutional data is a primary target, whether you're at the K-12 level or the higher ed level. The cost to investigate, remediate, deal with regulatory fines, those are just going to be things that organizations just don't want to do, especially an institution, Then there's the loss of reputation, your reputation, the student-employee trust, losing that, and if that's lost, getting it back could be a very difficult thing to do. And then, of course, that all eats into revenues for the institution. So that's the warfare. That's what we are up against. And so I want to really touch on the posture that I think is the right posture for us to deal with this space that we're in with the increased threats out there. So the attitude and way in which an organization prepares for cybersecurity threats, that's the definition of posture. And I want to liken it to if you can think about combat sports and you think about fighting, whether it's boxing, MMA, any of those types of fighting skills and arenas out there. A fighter actually prepares, and a fighter takes a certain posture where there's balance, whether it's starting from their core or the positioning of their feet. They work on things to make them more powerful against their enemy. And they also do things to absorb, a punch or a hit, to take it. They also do things to make it better for them to recover from injury if they were to be injured. For example, that might be eating a certain way, strength conditioning, those types of things. And so I actually think a lot of those things can be applied to us as we look at our threat, our enemy, which would be bad actors out there in this cyber warfare. Fighting cyber threats requires a good enterprise risk posture. So I want to emphasize enterprise because it's one thing for the technical department, the IT department, to do a very good job in and of itself to identify risks and protect the organization. It's another thing for the IT department to lead the effort and bring the organization alongside. And so that there's a culture of risk awareness, there's a cyber culture, there's a culture where departments are really partnering with IT to deal with these threats. And that's why I want to emphasize enterprise risk posture versus just the posture of your IT department. At the end of the day, I do believe that good risk posture is essential for confidence, stability, and power against threats. And again, still likening a lot of these things to fighters. So I want to talk a little bit more before I go into the core of today's topic. Again, I just want to set the scene a little bit. So an organization wants to be powerful against threats, okay? And how do you know if someone's powerful against anything? Again, if we look at fighters, you could tell how powerful someone is by their punch and how their punch makes the adversary, fall to the ground or something of that nature. You can assess their power in terms of, how well they can continue to push an adversary against in a direction that they don't necessarily want to go in. So as we look at organizations, I think you can tell if an institution is powerful based on how they react and respond to threats and incidents. So some of the things I think you can look at and you can tell how powerful an organization is, the number of threats that don't catch them off guard, the number of attacks they defend against, the speed at which they can remedy an incident, and then the speed at which they can recover from an incident. And the number of battles that anyone wins over time illustrates how powerful and skillful they are. So just keep that in mind, because the goal of us in our organizations is to help facilitate and create an organization that is powerful against threats and against risks. So the other thing, stability. We talked about, core and the balance of a fighter. I think when you look at organizations that are powerful against threats, these organizations probably have all or a lot of the things that you see on the screen right now. They have strong organizational culture. Their decision-making is very good. They may have committees, councils that are part of the decision-making process. They have succession plans, policies. They have stable infrastructure. So you're talking about the technology itself, good perimeter defenses, hardened configurations, endpoint patching. It could be intrusion detection systems. They're very good with their backups so they can restore if there's a ransomware threat or attack. So they have a good sound technology infrastructure. They have a good, stable information or data infrastructure, meaning that they have things in place to take care of access. They're controlling access in such a way, making sure only the people who need to have access to data have that. Encryption, the ability to detect anomalies, in their data. And lastly, they have a very good human firewall. And what do I mean by that? Employees who are trained, even students who are trained. They understand how to identify a phishing attack and what to do, or who to even contact if they have a suspicion about a data breach or a threat. When you're talking about the human firewall, I think it also has to do with how the team is structured. The IT team may be structured. A right mix of trained internal staff as well as outsourced staff. So we're talking about the power, organization being powerful against threats. And I want to highlight, with the right stability, an organization can can fuel that power and enable that power. And one other thing, the last thing I want to touch on before we get into the core, it does take a certain level of confidence to actually be effective in a fight. I do believe that there are 4 Ps that organizations need to work towards and really practice a lot in order to cultivate, the right posture against cyber threats. 1, preparation, then partnerships, playbook and practice, and performance. Okay, and then it's a constant flow of these things. So, preparation. In preparing for threats, there are things that can help with that, frameworks, and I'm gonna touch on frameworks shortly. So, COBIT, NIST. Some of you may have heard of NIST. CRIS is another by ISACA. COBIT is by ISACA. Frameworks help give guidance on how to build your enterprise a certain way to be resistant or resilient against threats. They give you the information, that you need to know to go about setting things up. Risk identification, strategic goals of organization. Understanding your strategy is very helpful in preparing for how you need to fight. Partnerships. Now, we know that in the education space, especially with higher ed, if there is a data breach, federal government, we need to contact federal government, whether it's financial student aid, whether it's Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education. These are agencies that want to partner with us. And I would recommend that it's best to be proactive in reaching out and trying to establish relationships or understanding what these organizations would need if your institution is breached, if anyone hasn't done that already. So developing partnerships, and it's even beyond just the government agencies, even partnerships among other institutions. And we'll touch on that in a minute as well. So preparation and partnerships help organizations become more confident in their fight. Let's park here on frameworks. So frameworks help with preparation, but frameworks also, if you don't know where to start, how to go about being more risk aware and being in a better position to identify risks and all of the things you need to have in place to be in the best posture, frameworks are here to help. And so on your screen, there are 4, really 5. NIST, it's from the National Institute, of course, Standards and Technology. That's what NIST is abbreviated for. And really, the NIST Cyber Framework is a risk-based approach to cybersecurity, really focusing on the controls you need to have in your technical environment. There's a maturity model also attached, and I'll briefly touch on that as well. There's actually certifications there's not a NIST certification per se, but there are other certifications like CISA and CISSP that align with NIST. COBIT 2019, very good framework. It's all about the governance and management of enterprise IT. So COBIT actually gives guidance on how to use the other frameworks. It's like a framework of frameworks. It tells you, the reason why I like it so much, it tells you specifically it's best to have these types of committees, or these are the roles in your organization that you should have. And this is typically what they should be responsible for in terms of whether it's cybersecurity, procurement, IT project management, asset management. It just gives you guidance on all functions that are related to technology. And one of those functions, again, is cybersecurity. And so COBIT does a very good job of telling you the roles and the people who should be in place, and then which other frameworks you should leverage. Specifically, COBIT calls out NIST and TOGAF and some other ones to leverage effectively. IT risk and C risk frameworks of ISACA. They focus mainly on risk management and risk identification. And then you have ITIL v4, which is all about service management, IT service delivery, but it does have a maturity methodology in it to assess how well your IT department is delivering value to the organization. So, and then there are a few others. You may have heard of PCI, SOC 2, and then of course ISO, whether it's 27001 or 27002. There are other frameworks out there, but again, I can spend hours talking about the frameworks. But if you aren't looking at a particular framework, modeling your environment after a certain framework, I really suggest NIST for the educational space, but along with COBIT. But it really would be a benefit to you to really see what these frameworks have to offer, because again, they give guidance on how to set up your environment with the best risk posture. Not only do you want to look at frameworks for the technology infrastructure, or the governance infrastructure, you want to look at frameworks that help you measure. And so the slide that you're seeing now are frameworks that deal with just measuring maturity. Many of you may have heard of CMMI, the Capability Maturity Model Integration. And it really focuses on processes and how mature are your processes, with of course a 5 being, the ultimate position to be in terms of the ultimate maturity mark. ISO 218272008. This is one from ISO, and I'm going to mention this later on in the presentation as well, because it's actually tied to one of the self-assessments I'm going to leave with you from EDUCAUSE. And so that's another one. And then, of course, ITIL v4, I mentioned, it has a maturity methodology as well. So I would recommend not just looking at your technology frameworks to help, but also look at a maturity model that you can then measure how well you're maturing in your cybersecurity risk posture. So I'm going to wrap up confidence and then move right along into the main part of the topic. So again, if we're still talking about confidence, they're playbooks, and playbooks is all about practicing. And so that's why you see those two together. You just don't want to have resources. You want to be able to practice through tabletop exercises, vulnerability testing, pen testing, phishing campaigns to test threats in your organization, the ability, the susceptibility of your users of clicking on a phishing email. And you want to do this over and over and over. So what does practice help with? And again, you should practice and document what's going on in the practice. That should help you create a playbook so that if something were to happen for real, if there's an incident, what does the playbook say? What should we do? What should we do first, second, third? You want to practice a lot and do this because, again, doing this helps build confidence. It helps an organization be in a much better position if they're breached or they're hit with something. We've done this. We've done this in a simulation. We've done this in a practice. So it's not so new. So all of that, to help round out the confidence, you then want to make sure you're using indicators to tell how well you're growing. And if you're seeing that your organization is doing things better, that's going to help with your confidence level as well. So measuring. With that, we're going to get into key risk indicators. And so you don't know if you're keeping pace with the threats that are out there and the advancement of cyber threats if you can't measure where you are and compare your pace with the pace of those threats. You can't measure how well you're compliant with regulations if you don't measure where you are. You don't have any indicators to help you measure that. You can't detect vulnerabilities if you're not measuring, that as well. And so key risk indicators are things that help you monitor the pace of your cybersecurity posture, how well you're being in compliance with with regulations, and how well you're detecting vulnerabilities even early. It's because KRIs really help from a lead indicator perspective, not a reactionary. They help you determine, hey, we have a gap here, so we need to shore that up now instead of being hit with a breach or something and then we're reacting later. So what are some key risk indicators? So some examples are, when you look at cybersecurity governance and compliance, some things that can help with, it could be simply the percentage of leaders who have reviewed your IT risk logs, the number of risk reports that you presented to the board. And underneath each of these, you see an example. For example, for the percentage of leaders who have reviewed your IT risk logs, maybe you say a drop under 90% annually, and that is a cause for concern. This is a risky area for us. You may say a drop under presenting to our board, our executive leadership, less than one time per year is a significant risk. Now, for those of us who are in higher education, there's a GLBA indication that you should present risks in your cybersecurity posture to your board at least annually. And so if that's the case, for your area, you want an indicator that says, are we keeping pace with that? Are we doing that the way we need to be doing it for the year? You see percentage of compliance with regulations, percentage of IT budget for cybersecurity. So NetSurion has a benchmark out there that says an IT unit or department, if they're doing a really good job, they're spending between 8 to 14% of their IT budget on cybersecurity. Okay, so if you're within that range, that could be an indicator. Okay, maybe we're keeping pace with industry standards. If you're below that, then maybe it's an indicator that, hey, we need to look into that. Some other KRIs could be the number of vulnerability scans, the number of committee sessions, or risk log reviews. When you look at your cybersecurity resources, your IT staffing, the percentage of IT staff with cybersecurity certifications, maybe a drop under 50% is a cause of concern for us. And lastly, the average speed responding to incidents. That could be another KRI for you. So the next slide, there are a few others. Percentage of them, when you look at just awareness and training, KRI you can use to determine how well you're doing there, educating your employees or your students, with the percentage of them completing cybersecurity training, and what percentage of that is satisfactory to you, what percentage of that should really be an indicator that we need to ramp up efforts or really look into that. Percentage of employees passing a phishing campaign or phishing test, number of cyber incidents in your institution, the number of data integrity incidents, and even the number of incidents occurring with third-party vendors, being that we're still liable for what goes on with a third party if they have access to our data. So those are just some examples of KRIs. And I want to talk about benchmarks just very briefly. They're out there. The slide that you're looking at has some benchmarks from SecureFrame. 67% of companies reported more than 21 insider security incidents per year. Now, and that was in 2022. Now, this is insider threats. These are threats from disgruntled employees, and internal threats from that standpoint. 1,300 being the average number of attacks per organization per week during the first quarter of 2024. 59% of small businesses surveyed don't have a cybersecurity awareness training program. 97% of organizations have gaps in its risk management plan. 42% of organizations leaders said that ongoing improvements in risk posture were based on a cyber roadmap when asked about priorities. And then the last one, 37% of employees among 3 organizations that were tested in a case study by KnowBe4 in 2011, and that's pretty far out there. But these organizations, they found that 37% of the employees in these organizations clicked on a phishing simulation. And now this last one is not a benchmark from SecureFrame. That's actually from KnowBe4, but I put it there because I want to highlight the point I want to make about benchmarks. Benchmarks are good. They can be difficult to get at times, and even when you have them, I want to caution that you still have to know your organization. You can't go off completely on what you get from a benchmark. For example, the 37% of employees clicking on a phishing email. Let's say that you think that 37%, that's the benchmark, but you have in your organization there's 20% of your employees that click on a phishing email. You may think, okay, that's good. I'm 20%. We're under that benchmark number. But what if those average organizations had 20 employees each, meaning about 7 of their employees would be likely to click on a phishing attempt? And let's say your organization has 200 employees with 20%. That would be about, I believe, about 40 or so of your employees clicking on an email. 40 of your employees clicking on the email versus 7 in another organization. You would not be in a better posture because there's more risk to you. Let's say you had 2,000 employees and the click rate was 10%. Well, 10% is less than 37% and 20%. But at 2,000 employees, you would be looking at, I believe, 200 of your employees being likely to click on a phishing attempt. So I wanted to use that example to highlight, use benchmarks with caution. They're good to have, but you really need to understand your environment. That's the best posture to take and the best position to be in. So once we have KRIs, we have indicators, what do? Well, we use these to get better. Our opponent is getting better every day. Threats are getting better every day. So we can't simply say we passed our vulnerability tests today. All of the other indicators say we're fine today. We have to continue working towards and using our indicators to help improve, get better than we were yesterday. It's all about being resilient, having continuity, being in compliance, and having very good reputation among our employees and our customers, our students. So some strategies now that you can think of, and some of you may already have these strategies in your environments. But these are some examples, and I want to connect here with these examples. You have the strategy, and then you use the KRIs to measure said strategy. So, for example, in terms of governance, you could have a strategy of developing strong cybersecurity governance, or aligning with industry cybersecurity frameworks, or maintaining compliance with regulations. That could be your strategy. Then you can have a tactic, for example. Okay, if we're going to develop a strong cybersecurity governance, we want to have onboarding, board involvement, risk committee sessions. Your KRIs could then be used to help measure, are we doing this well? And if we are doing those well today, how do we even get better at that? Another example of a strategy, this one has to do with intelligence and preparation, enhancing your cybersecurity threat intelligence. Okay, a tactic could be monthly vulnerability testing, monitoring breaches, monthly risk committee meetings, and again, using the percentage of vulnerability scans, a passing of vulnerability scans, the number of risk log reviews. Those KRIs can help show and monitor improvement in these strategies. Now, the last thing there, the annual EDUCAUSE Cybersecurity Program self-assessment. I would recommend this tool for the universities. If you're not already aware of it, I believe it's a good tool for you to self-assess your cybersecurity program. And of course, the link is in the presentation, and this can be found directly on EDUCAUSE's website. And it's basically a spreadsheet, and I believe it's about 100 questions, maybe a little more than that, where you, again, it's a self-assessment where you answer questions, and it gives you a score on your maturity. As you see here, column D, it says current maturity level. And so it helps you assess internally where you are. It produces a score. I believe 5 is the ultimate score, or the maximum score you can have. And whatever score you get on it, this can be a tool that helps you monitor. The thing is, it actually tells you specific functions, specific areas that you needed to improve in. So that's the good thing about this self-assessment as well. Free tool out there, available out there on EDUCAUSE's website. So just want to recommend that as well. So in terms of some other strategies, increasing cybersecurity preparation among departments. You could have a tactic of quarterly tabletop exercises with not just your IT department, but your financial, your academic, and your other departments. And again, using the KRIs to help determine where we are with those. And developing collaborative strategy, secure cybersecurity relationships with peer institutions. That could be a strategy, whereas you have regular knowledge sharing sessions with other institutions, other K-12 districts. And again, these things ultimately help you get to where you want to be, which is in the best cybersecurity posture, risk posture you can be in. When you're talking about resources, a strategy could be you want to enhance your cybersecurity skills among IT personnel. A tactic then could be updating position descriptions with required cybersecurity training. In my experience, I don't think a lot of position descriptions have identified or aligned especially in the education sector, align the training that's actually needed with the job, with a role. And actually having that in the position description, and then you're measuring it. Well, how many people on the team have the training that they need? Again, this is the strategy, and this is using a KRI with it, and you're able to monitor. If only 10% of your staff have cybersecurity training or certifications today, then how does that look next year? How does it look 2 years from now? And you're able to measure your progress over time. Okay, improve readiness with cybersecurity threats. A tactic there could simply be augmenting your IT staff with a vendor, a security vendor as well. So just some ideas and things out there. Another strategy could be strengthening your human firewall. A tactic could be implementing cybersecurity training using required courses. Again, we talked about phishing campaigns that many people are aware of, and again, measuring how that's going over time. Again, with that KnowBe4 case study, it was found that, again, I talked about the 37% click rate with those 3 organizations in 2011. Well, after that, they actually trained the employees. And after training the employees, they repeated the phishing attack, the simulation, and then found that there was a 74% reduction in the susceptibility. So the training does work. It doesn't get everyone, but it does work. In terms of the infrastructure, again, you could have a strategy of enhancing resiliency of the information technology infrastructure, And this is where you get into hardening system configurations, performing patches and those things. And again, using your KRIs to measure that as well. So ultimately, you want to get to a point, remember what I said earlier, to where you're powerful against cyber attacks. And when we reach a certain maturity, there's good decision making from senior leadership. There's proactive risk management. We have solid policies. There's well-defined incident response and recovery plans. There's ongoing training. There's effective detection mechanisms in our organizations. There's effective third-party vendor management, strong internal auditing practices, and very consistent with regulations. Our compliance would be very consistent. And of course, a lot of these things will be aligned in framework. So that is what maturity looks like. And it's just a matter of getting from where we are. We're all probably at different places in different spaces, but wherever we are, there's an opportunity to grow, and we need to grow because the threats are going to continue to grow. What I'll leave with you is that, maturing your posture does take time. You do have to identify your priorities. And there's some risks you have to identify. We're going to really address this particular risk. We're going to address this. We can't deal with the others. And this is why senior leadership, whether it's your president's cabinets at the university level, your administration at the K-12 level, this is why involving your senior leadership is very valuable, because they help identify those risks that the organization can't live with, that the institution really, they don't want to live with or deal with. And so that kind of helps your prioritization on which risks you're going to respond to, whether it's with dollars, training, bringing in other agencies, other third-party vendors to help. So really understanding your priorities, and your leadership is very valuable there. Remembering your baseline posture, identify where your targets are, you just move one step at a time. So in my conclusion, again, hopefully you've gotten some things out of today's session. It takes a team. Again, think about a combat fighter and everything that they do to grow and learn how to fight and how to deal with the adversary, and lead your organization, your institution in that. Don't just look at it from a technical perspective, but lead your organization, bring it alongside all of the other departments in that. So together, you create this enterprise that is very resilient and powerful against cybersecurity threats. So I leave that with you today. Okay. I see that we have a question. Would the HECBAT and have the same posture questions? Very good question. There will be similar questions between the HECBAT from EDUCAUSE and the self-assessment that I indicated. The main difference would be the HECBAT is for the vendor. That's what you would give to a third-party vendor. Let's say you're acquiring software, and you want to understand the vendor's posture. You want to understand their threat level. You want to understand, do they have certain things in place? That's where the HECBAT would come in. It's a questionnaire that the vendor would ask, and then provide that to you, and then you're able to see where they are, their score, what their risk level is. And okay, now that we have that, are we going to live with that? Or is it okay for us to acquire the software, acquire the technical solution that the vendor's providing, because they've passed, our liking from a cybersecurity threat perspective or risk perspective? However, the self-assessment is not for the vendor, that's for the organization internally. So there'll be some questions that are a little different but at the end of the day, they get about at the same conclusion. Just one is for the vendor, one is really internally for the institution. Okay, so another question I see here. How do you balance time spent managing IT, putting out fires, et cetera, and being able to do a thorough risk assessment, benchmarking? Very good question. That's a challenge. That is a challenge. So I mentioned earlier augmentation. And so I've found in my experience, being able to leverage a virtual chief information security officer is helpful because they're able to really bring things to the table from a high level that the internal staff just doesn't have time to do because they are putting out fires. They're dealing with the incidents. They're dealing with phishing issues, and they're dealing with patching and all of those things on the back end. So how do you still keep those things going? But you have to keep those things going. But you need to be thinking forward. You need to be thinking, so where do we need to be heading? What do we need to be doing in terms of solidifying the infrastructure from an architecture perspective? And so augmenting your staff may be something you need to look into. I found it to be very helpful with a virtual CISO. In some cases, when you look at evaluation, you look at third party, doing a very good job of evaluating your third parties. And this might not be applicable for everyone, but just something as simple as using AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot, to maybe evaluate terms and conditions. And you can't rely solely on that, but maybe AI can help you parse through and summarize a vendor's terms and conditions far quicker than someone on your team. And then you're able to then meet with your team through a committee, a risk committee, or some mechanism like that to then look at the summary. So I do think you have to leverage third party security vendors. I do think you need to look at ways of speeding up the evaluation of things, but you have to find something that works for you because we have to continue to fight fires, but we have to look forward as well. So hopefully some of that may help. Next question, any advice for convincing institutional leadership to invest more in cybersecurity? I think the thing that has helped me over time has been actually bringing them into the conversation. Showing senior leadership vulnerabilities, showing senior leadership how compliant that you are, you may not be, whether it's GLBA, FERPA, other regulations out there. And then showing what could happen if we're breached here, this translates into X amount of dollars, brand reputation issues. And I've found that in bringing leaders into the conversation and sharing these things with them and showing them and talking about the impact from a dollar's perspective, the cost it would be if we're hit with something, the cost that would be associated with students, losing students or impacting retention. I found that to be enough to get them engaged and to ask more questions, and then showing them the comparison. Well, this is the cost for us to harden, our infrastructure here. And if we did that would reduce the risk exposure here. And I found that not only doing it that way, because sometimes sticker shock is enough to cause senior leaders to say, no, we're just not going to do it. Having a plan of how do you phase something in over time? Okay, this is our risk exposure, but if we spent this amount of money this year, this budget year, and then next year we can spend this, and the year after that we can spend that, and then over time, over a three-year period, we can go from this risk level to this risk level and be able to reduce the threat to students, to our institutional data. I found that senior leaders are very vested in that type of conversation because at the end of the day, they don't want to lose students. They don't want to deal with spending. They don't want to deal with losing money. They just need information to help them see the big picture. What I found in my experience, sometimes with colleagues, just saying, hey, we have this risk, we need $100,000 to fix it, and I need it tomorrow. That doesn't translate well. They tend to need more. And I've had very good conversations with leadership, senior leaders, when it's presented that way. And you don't always get what you want, but you get some things. And if you have a plan, you can be very successful at growing over time and getting the things you need that protect the organization. One other thing I'll say about that, when you're able to use information from third parties, your leadership can also, it adds more credibility. Not to say that you may not know what you're talking about, but there's value in leaders seeing what you're presenting and how it compares to other institutions or what third-party vendors are saying. And so that's the advice I would give there.